We have, let me just ask a question. Is Jessica White here? Do you want, I have some questions on environmentalism that I have to ask Lynn first, but do you want to ask this yourself? You want me to read it? All right, I'm gonna ask, why don't you come up here? I think you should do it. You what? Come on now, don't be bashful. Do you want your notes? Because you wrote this out so well.
Take it. Thank you. Okay. Is this on? Okay, I'll just lower it. It's okay. I think it's good. Okay. I didn't expect to have to read it myself, okay? But good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica White, and I'm from the New York City LaRouchePAC out of New Jersey. My statement is, and then my question. Over the last few days, after gaining the support and encouragement of the New Jersey, New York LaRouchePAC, embodied in one of the 6 LaRouche candidates, Diane Sayers, myself and several of my colleagues embarked on a mission to lobby many of the congresspersons in the House of Representatives. We insisted that they sign on and co-sponsor H.R. 1489, the Return to Prudent Banking Act of 2011, which in principle is the FDR Glass-Steagall of 1933. In too many cases, we were met with resistance, to say the least, from some of these congresspersons who seem unable to commit to ending the systemic collapse of the United States and Europe by collateral damage, and insisted on blaming everyone and everything except Obama and their own cowardice. How can we continue to rally the necessary patriotic response and move past this sophistry? Thank you.
Okay. Very nice. Very, very nice. Precise and to the point. Simple. It's called guts. Now, you have shown guts. But I find among many people in the same environments have not shown guts. This is the principle of leadership. Now, I was in World War II. I was not very important in the war itself. I achieved my importance in World War II after the defeat of Japan, which I was shipped back into India, and I began creating trouble. But I know from this experience, and from the experience of my generation, which went to war at that time, that the baby boomer generation that came after me is gutless. It's systemically gutless. It's not just many gutless people. The generation itself is systemically gutless in its character. Now, what do you do with that? You go back to World War II, and you think about how leadership was conducted during World War II. It was conducted on the basis of my experience on December 7th of 1941, when I happened to be in New York City, and I was on a road to down the street across the Midtown to visit a hotel where I was going to meet some people on the business. I walked off the streets were silent. Central Manhattan, silent. I walked down toward the east side, silence. I walked into the hotel where I was going to meet, silence. Then I looked, and I saw the reason for the silence. Pearl Harbor had been struck. In the early aftermath of that occasion, there was an influx of young American males going to recruiting stations, which were not even open at that time in many cases, to be recruited into military service in response to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, what that did, because Roosevelt was president, The reaction of the American people was the sense that Roosevelt is going to act. And these fellows who packed the recruiting stations, and I was almost one of them, I was close to it, were reacting to the fact that Roosevelt was the president. The confidence in the leadership shown by this man in peace corresponded to their trust to this man as a leader in war. And it worked out that way. About 17 million of us were engaged in military service during that period. What happened was, immediately after, Roosevelt was out, dead. And Truman took over, who was a British whore, and a Wall Street whore. American people lost their guts. Didn't happen all at once, but it became a creeping thing. The wives were really first responsible for it. The men who had been in military service generally retained their experience of military service as their attitude. But the wives would say, it was typical, you've been away for 5 years. We don't have a family. You don't have a good job. You don't have a university education. You've got to behave yourself. Don't get our family into trouble. And that was the cowardice moved in. Now, I was in that period, and I was sometimes the brunt of my, not that I wanted war, but I was the brunt of opposing Truman and what he represented. I saw people cringe. And these people who I saw cringe were the mothers and fathers of what became the baby boom generation. That was bad enough. But then with the killing of Jack Kennedy, the cowardice spread. Real cowardice. And the cowardice was accompanied by a great movement into war on hashish and other kinds of recreational substances, shall we say. What we got out of that whole process, and out of the university generation of the 1960s, we got a bunch of prostitutes. That is, equivalent prostitutes. No guts, no morals, no purpose, just pleasure. Different kinds of pleasure, practically every week a different kind of pleasure. Smoke this, drink that. Good new fancy kind of sex, no human being required. that sort of thing was going on. And that's what we faced. Now you have a generation which are born to the baby boomers. Those were the baby boomers. It was because of the loud noises they made from their rear ends, I guess. Right? And you have another generation which has come along, and it's not quite as gutless. But it's uncertain in its choice of values. It's confused on values, moral, all kinds of values. Now, what that generation is waiting for is a clear voice on a choice of a system of values. Right now, that generation is somewhat shattered, more or less degree, by the lack of a sense of specific kinds of values which actually function in the sense of providing the moral guidance for leadership. And you have to look at leadership. There are some people in society who tend to become leaders. And the values adopted by those who tend to become leaders are the key to what society is capable of doing. We have now a youth movement, which is not just a youth movement. It's a movement among a certain layer, a small layer generally, of people who have the gut and are looking for the light to find the way to making their lives meaningful. The problem is that the politicians generally do not provide that courage. They don't. And those among us, the young people who are doing this organizing out in the field, are facing exactly that. How do we define for a certain number of potentially leading people within that age group in society, that chiefly between 25 and 35 is a key area you have to look at? Are we providing them an assurance and knowledge required for them to fulfill the role of the kind of leadership which they are disposed to supply, provided they can get a decent answer as to what leadership is, what the standard of leadership is. That's the issue. I'm an old man with certain pretensions of a certain kind. An old man, among the oldest you can find these days. But I have within me the fire that I remember from the time I walked the streets of Manhattan to that visit. I'm still the same fire, and I'm looking for people who want to become the modern equivalent of my passion back then. That's the solution. Accept the standards of value, the goals which are right, and provide leadership to people who want to become part of that process. And the great crisis that we face today will tend to create the opportunity if the leadership of them is provided. My job, my role is to try to make that real. That's how leadership works. And we have people in this room who have a sense of moving in the direction of assuming that role of leadership. Got a couple here in the front row. I said, no. Exactly that. And they represent the six, the group of six, which is not just a group of six. There's six people who are at the core of an organization, which is in part smaller and in part larger. Of leadership within the leadership. Then the broader mass of people around who these leaders are going to pull together around an adopted sense of the moral principles and ideas which are needed to defeat the enemy in this struggle. That's us, including this old man, me. And the old man is around just to show you that there's a connection between then, as the Irishman said, and now.